Welcome back, warriors, where war never ends, insanity never lasts. Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, embrace yourselves, because from here on out there is only war. Let's go. A lot of people in history and fiction have an obsession with long, elaborate titles. Ever looked up the full title of an Ottoman emperor? It's practically an essay. Warhammer, of course, takes us to the next level. Take Archaon, for example. His full title? Archaon the Ever-Chosen, the Three-Eyed King, and Exalted Grand Marshal of the Apocalypse. Now, fair is fair. I'd say he earned it. Even my insulin pump seems to agree. But if we're talking about ridiculous, over-the-top titles, no one in Warhammer does it better than one particular king. He was the ruler of the grandest city in the desert, the supreme sovereign of an empire that defied time itself, the unmatched warrior whose mere name struck terror into the hearts of lesser kings, Settra the Imperishable. Now let's begin the story of the man who refused to bow to gods, to kings, or even to death itself. Settra was not the first king of Nehekhara, but he was by far its greatest. When he ascended the throne, his kingdom was a fractured land of warring states, its rulers having long forgotten their duty to their gods and their people. Once Nehekhara had been the crown jewel of civilization. Now it was little more than a collection of feuding cities and crumbling ruins. But Settra refused to accept mediocrity. Unlike his weak-willed predecessors, he would not allow his kingdom to rot away into obscurity. He sought to restore Nehekhara to its former golden age, and that meant reforging both its power and its faith. When the priest came to him, warning that no king could truly reign without divine favor, he did not scoff, nor did he dismiss their words as superstition. He listened, and not just out of obligation. He genuinely believed in the gods of Nehekhara. If divine favor was what it took to rule, then he would secure it, no matter the cost, and that decision would change the fate of his empire forever. He actually listened, presumably surprised someone was actually listening to them. They helped Settra secure a covenant with his deities. The task required included, but was not limited to, building statues, holding prayer services, and sacrificing all of his children to prove his devotion to them. If nothing else, I'm pretty goddamn sure his devotion wasn't in doubt. And sure enough, the next day after he killed all his kids, the Nile River flooded and ensured a bountiful harvest like never before, guaranteeing that Nehekhara's long-lost wealth would begin to once more flourish, and the people would forever love Settra. With the people and gods themselves now at his side, he found himself with no shortage of military recruits, and began reconquering the lands of Nehekhara, under the banner of his city, Khemri. As it turns out, news travels fast in ancient Nehekhara, and many other kings outright swore fealty to him. Those who didn't, well, picture them as any of the armies that tried to fight Alexander the Great, and you've got a pretty good idea of how they fared. While Settra remained a cruel ruler, as he did in his first iteration, he was not unkind. While Machiavelli might be one of the most misinterpreted writers in all of history, his teachings were followed well. He was feared, yes, but also loved. Well, if you went against his will, you were going to come down with a case of murder very quickly. He treated those under him with respect and fairness. It wasn't the Imperium, where you're just thrown into the meat grinder because it's easier than not doing that. He actually loved his people as much as he wanted them to fear him. Quickly, all of Nehekhara was under his control, but take heed of that sentence. All of Nehekhara. If you haven't noticed, Nehekhara is not all of the world. In fact, if you look at the Immortal Empire's map, it's not even that much of it. This was an absolutely unacceptable state of affairs. There were people out there who didn't know who Settra was. To rectify this grievous mistake, Settra sent his armies forth to conquer and spread his influence even farther. His army reached as far as Austeria, and according to the Warhammer wiki, his name was feared around half the world. And you know what? I believe it. The High Elves and Dwarfs might have been living their best lives by that point. But if Settra rolled around, he would have shown them what's what. Oh, you have the toughest armor known to exist and have mastered engineering like no other? Very interesting, but have you considered 500 chariots to the face? If you are wondering how he managed it all, believe it or not, he didn't. He graciously allowed some people to help him. There were, of course, the Nehekhara gods, who were undoubtedly honored to assist someone as majestic and mighty as Settra. And naturally, his citizens and soldiers loved him as much as they feared him, even slightly aggravate him, and you'd end up with a one-way ticket to a very unpleasant death. His generosity was matched only by his temper. He also had his right-hand man, Naoth, whose name sounded suspiciously like Nagash, but fear not. Naoth was no necromancer. It's only a slight possibility that he might have been descended from the Satan-worshipping Vikings. But to give the guy the credit he deserves, he was a herald par excellence for Settra. If something needed to be smashed, he could handle that. The Varangian Guard can only wish they could have been half as effective as Naoth at killing things. But he was also smart enough to make sure he remembered everything about Settra that was necessary to introduce him in courtly life and generally make sure people knew who he was. This might sound like nothing big, but remember, Settra is very full of himself. While his heralds were undoubtedly paid very well, if you screwed anything up, you were getting your head removed. So when it was time for Settra to make a diplomatic visit and have his titles read off for 2 whole hours, Naoth was the guy who had the unequaled honor of reading them. He even got one of Settra's old weapons, the Flail of Skulls, for his service. As time went on, however, eventually Settra realized his greatest enemy was still yet to be conquered: old age. While he lived for longer than anyone, even among the Nehekara, whose lifespans were longer than most people's, he was still slowly getting old, and that just wouldn't do. And so Settra is the one who founded the Thekin mortuary cult and bid them to unlock the secrets of immortality. Across the Warhammer world, they traveled looking for answers on how to live forever, and fair is fair to them, they made some pretty good progress. They invented mummification, so people's corpses still looked fashion show ready in death, and they prolonged lifespans by many centuries. Unfortunately, hundreds of years still isn't quite forever, historically speaking. Let's say someone has been alive for 300 years, they would predate the USA. And that's not saying much in the grand scheme of how long history's been going. Despite Settra giving them a blank check and probably a few threats to motivate them, the mortuary cult couldn't find the recipe for immortality. Evidently, none of the dragon rulers in Cath were green and yellow. Despairing that not only were there places whose armies he hadn't yet thrashed, but also the possibility that in death, everything he worked for would be undone, Settra reluctantly admitted that there was one enemy he couldn't conquer. For now, at least. And so, he ordered the largest pyramid in the history of Khemri, and indeed all of Nehekara constructed. It towered over all, and while subsequent rulers would follow in his footsteps and build their own, none would dare make it taller than Settra's. That would have probably been enough to make him revive himself, if only so he could pimp slap whoever had the gall to do that. When his last breath finally came, he was entombed alongside his entire goddamn army, all of it just thrown in the massive basement of the thing, and presumably told that it truly was an honor to die alongside their king. Really. Trust me though, to be fair in Settra's case, it was an honor to die with him. In the original version of Settra, the people rejoiced when the tyrant finally died. In the good version of Settra, upon his death, the entire nation mourned the loss of the greatest monarch to ever live. The entire thing was covered in potent wards to keep it safe from the British looking to do some aggressive archaeology. The mortuary cult promised that, as soon as they could, they would revive Settra to bring about another endless golden age. They even said they'd give him a cool, living golden body once they figured it out. The kings of Nehekara would do their best to live up to Settra's legacy. While they never could, that's no fault of their own. Imagine an Olympic athlete trying to live up to those. And the standards of Kratos. Can't be done. But that's hardly something to beat yourself up over. Nehekara still prospered for well over 1,000 years after Settra's death, coming more and more into contact with the outside world, such as with Cath, and generally being the best human civilization around. The mortuary cult learned much since his passing, furthering their ability to preserve corpses in death and learning how to perform magic. The worst that can merely be said was that during the reign of King Thut, Khemri was looking a bit weak compared to the other cities in the area. While Settra would have thrown the mother of all temper tantrums at learning that his capital city was falling behind the others, if one city becoming less influential was the worst thing to happen during Thut's reign, then I'd say he did fine. Unfortunately, that being the worst thing that happened was not the case, because Thut's older brother was named Nagash. I've already covered him in another video, but to make it relevant here, Nagash's final act before his death, one of his deaths anyway, was to kill everyone in Nehekara with magic and revive them under his control. Unfortunately for him, he came down with a bad case of being chopped into pieces, courtesy of Aladar and the Skaven of all people. But the damage was already done. Across all of Nehekara, the dead woke from their slumber. Some had been gone for millennia and were little more than bones. Others were only just slain by Nagash and still had all their meaty bits attached. But of most interest were the buried rulers of the land, now known as Tomb Kings, and the armies they took with them, because they took a page out of Settra's book in more ways than one. Their tombs were all lined with arcane wards, and as such they were protected from the Gash's magic. They were revived certainly, but not as mindless thralls. They had all their wits about them, and came to with shock and horror over what Nagash had wrought. Of course, there were other problems to deal with. Let's run through a scenario. One Tomb King revives and he sees that his son ended all the trade agreements he negotiated in order to make himself look powerful. He's probably not too happy. In turn, his son hates his grandson, who married a noblewoman from a family he bickered with his entire reign, who in turn hates his great-granddaughter because she tossed his favorite throne into a trash heap, who in turn hates his great-great-grandson because he tried to sell bits of her pyramid away to pay for his gambling addiction. This is a single dynasty's worth of infighting that comes up as a result of thousands of years of lineage, all trying to have their own way. And I mean, how would you even fix that? They were all the rightful kings. One of the problems is that you can't say one of them had any more or less right to rule. Now imagine this multiplied across the entirety of Nehekara, as all of the dynasties have all of their members revive at once and try to take charge. Combine this with all of the fighting each dynasty would have with other dynasties. And please do remember, this is all on top of Nagash wrecking the place with his antics. Things were not looking good, and the mortuary cult was completely unable to maintain any semblance of order. After years of infighting, they realized that without drastic measures, there was a pretty good chance that the Tomb Kings were going to destroy Nehekara with their petty wars, and thus did Hierophant Katap make a drastic decision. Revive Settra the Imperishable and throw him at everyone so they'll shut up for 5 minutes, on account of it being better than everyone else's. His pyramid was untouched by Nagash's sorcery. This also meant his army was unscathed by the war that was consuming Nehekara. The Tomb Kings may all be functionally immortal, But it still took some time for them to respawn, you see, and Khemri didn't see nearly as much fighting as the other cities, if only because no one wanted to dick with Settra's place. He woke up and pretty quickly went to smashing mummy heads together until they sat down and stopped stabbing each other in the empty rib cages. Anyone who refused to swear fealty to him had their skulls repurposed to self-replenishing catapult ammunition, which was also lit on fire, so people learned to take him seriously again. His terms were fair enough. Swear fealty to him. When you need something, you better goddamn listen. You can fight each other to your heart's content. But for the love of God, when something important is happening, you better cut the crap for a few days. After that, he sat down with the Mori cult and demanded they explain why he didn't have a body made of pure gold yet. They explained Nash's shenanigans to him, and he was just perhaps a slightly bit peeved off. He banished KP until he could come back with the secrets of a golden body, so Settra wasn't just a partially decayed living corpse anymore, and set to work rebuilding his kingdom. He would always keep an eye out for the return of Nagash, and frequently tried to destroy his Black Pyramid. Partly because it was a massive eyesore of evil magic, and partly because it was bigger than Settra, and that wasn't something he was going to accept lying down. Never worked though, unfortunately. He should have borrowed a few nukes from the Skaven. He was always successful at stopping Aaron whenever he tried to do something big though, so he wasn't completely helpless against the Gash. He also continued expanding his ever-increasing list of titles with various exploits that would make anyone look bad by comparison. One time someone was sticking around with magic and accidentally opened a portal to chaos in the middle of Khemri, which naturally meant demons were now all over the place, pissing on the Tomb King's sandy lawns. Settra took this in stride and casually soloed a great unclean one before throwing the guy who started this whole mess into the portal. That solved things, if for no other reason than the Chaos Gods were scared that Ashur would walk into the portal and have words with them personally on the matter. Another time, when demons were suddenly a thing, Settra was feeling generous and graciously allowed an army of high elves to help assist him in getting rid of the chaotic threat. Not that he needed their help, of course. He could have walked down there alone and dealt with the problem by himself. He just felt like being kind to the peons who had come so far to deal with this threat, even though they needn't have bothered. He even let them leave with their lives after the fact. Then there was the time he burned down half of Norska to get his hat back. At some point, some idiot Norrin figured that looting from the dead must be easy peasy. Unfortunately, the dead he wanted to loot were from Khemri, and neither rested peacefully nor well. At all, really. Settra isn't one to let a little thing like death get in the way of workplace productivity. After all, the Norrin did manage to get a mutual kill on Settra, so thank God he didn't go to any other place in the Warhammer world, or he would have probably burned the entire place to the ground. By the time the battle had ended, the entire Tomb King army was slain. They gave as good as they got though, and only 12 Norrin survivors remained from the entire army. They took as much treasure as they could carry, went back home, and used it to become the leaders of whatever tribes they returned home to. Unfortunately for them, Tomb Kings respawn, and when Settra did, he was pissed. Not only had they taken his things, but the lieutenant of the guy he traded kills with stole his crown. He sent out spies across the world to find him, which wasn't really that hard when there was suddenly an influx of a dozen newly minted Chaos Lords, all of whom were wearing suspiciously necrotic-looking clothing. It's not hard to put the 2 and 2 together to get 4, as in, Settra is going to make you beg to your 4 gods to put you out of your misery the moment he gets his hands on you. He set out, and soon enough there were 12 less Chaos Lords in existence, and several thousand fewer Norrin and Chaos monsters. Do keep in mind that Tudrum is roughly in Egypt, while Norska is in the Arctic Circle, if we're using Earth terms. Do not mess with his stuff, anyways. Now it's time for End Times lore. Settra is probably the best part of End Times lore since the Nagash book wasn't total garbage, and Suchet's badass even to the end. But because the End Times make me angry, I've decided to take it out on all of you. Therefore, it is my pleasure to announce that you are now breathing manually, your tongue is not comfortably resting in your mouth, your jaw is limply hanging from your skull, and you're not sure if you should close it or let it hang. Somewhere on your body there's an itch you would not have realized until I brought it up just now. Now that everyone wants to cause me physical harm, we are ready to discuss the End Times. Just prior to the End Times, Settra had reawakened all the Tomb Kings at once to begin a great period of expansion, so all the world would love and fear the name Settra the Imperishable. Then they got word that Aaron and Manfred were fast-tracking Nagash's latest resurrection, and rapidly switched to fortifying the hell out of Nara to stop them. Nagash covered the entire land in magical darkness, which proceeded to do nothing. They just kept building. It's kind of hard to scare a bunch of people who may or may not have spent millennia dead by turning out the lights, let alone the skeletons that are largely just mindless automatons. Aran showed up to lead the charge, and how well do you think he did by going 1v1 against Settra? If you said Settra bisected him and chained him into his chariot, then you're correct. Unfortunately, Nagash was playing 5D chess during this time period, and somehow Nagash snuck himself into NCA using Arkan's body. I don't know how. I don't want to know how. All I can tell you is that some traitorous Lich Priest cast a spell on a different Lich Priest, or to stun him, and then the Nagash reverse forward out of Aaron. Nagash has finally returned to his ancient home and begins dueling the Imperishable. After Nagash not only returned to life in his strongest form yet, but devoured the power of the god of the dead Usan. He still couldn't beat Settra. Settra Tokyo drifted around Nagash and his chariot for quite some time, until Nagash eventually managed to break it, and so they entered a battle of wills. Whatever the hell that means, I don't know. But Settra's willpower was equal to that of Nagash's. A reminder, Nagash is now, for all intents and purposes, a god, and Settra was still his equal. So Nagash, being the bastard he is, just swarmed Settra with ghosts until he could pick him up. While he was manhandling him, Nagash demanded Settra's loyalty to him, and Settra responded with, "Go yourself, skelly man." Not, not literally. His actual line was much cooler, and it's on screen right now so you can see it. I'm just not much of a voice actor, so I'm not going to paley Settra's good name by butchering his quote. Of course, as cool as the quote is, Nagash didn't really care, and just blew up his body before forcing Settra to watch as he burned Khemri to the ground. It was in this moment, and only this moment mind you, that Settra ever felt anything close to despair, as his kingdom was torn apart from under him by the greatest enemy his people had ever known. That lasted for all of 5 minutes after Nagash left, until 4 mysterious figures put him back together, gave him a Dragon Ball Z Zenkai boost, and bade him go north for revenge. I wonder who they could be. 4 mysterious figures telling him to go north where all the evil Vikings are invading. Mystery for the ages. Games Workshop. Wow. Very impressive. Anyways, added to the not 4 not gods of not chaos told him to go north, he did. All the way to Middenheim on foot. Then, when he got there, he approached Archon as an ally. Now you might be saying that's GW's ruin, etc. But in perhaps the only instance I'll ever say anything like this, give the people writing the end times some credit. Yeah, that tasted bad. Archon tells him to kill Kik's Sunners since he's too much of a loose cannon. So Settra does. He just kills Kik the Sun Eater, one of the largest and strongest creatures in the Warhammer world. Just cuts his head off before the incarnates arrive in Middenheim to stop the end of the world. Settra wandered off to who knows where for a while, having a good think. When they finally did arrive, Settra confronts Nagash, telling him that the Chaos Gods resurrected him to kill Nagash. He then proceeded to behead a dragon ogre Shagi in one blow, which I will remind you is an enemy so tough, even Gartrick and Felix struggled against one. He is going to personally kill the Chaos Gods for daring to offer him a chance to serve them. He says that he will temporarily forgive Nagash for his transgressions, though his head is next after the Chaos Gods. He has last seen bulldozing his way through the mess of chaos as the world falls apart around him. Just in case you weren't aware, this makes Settra the single being in Warhammer, either 40k or fantasy, who has offered everything there is to be by chaos, with no strings attached, from power to worship and even a fully restored golden body, like he wanted, and told him to eat it because Settra does not serve, Settra rules. Now that's how you give chaos the finger. As for Age of Sigmar, there's been little word of Settra. Now if you're aware of a certain character called Settra, leading a group of Stormcast called the Imperishable, that just happens to have a special hatred for Nagash, you might be calling BS on this. But hear me out. There are a few reasons I don't think that it's actual silly Settra, or at least that's not how they're bringing Settra back. Truly one, while the Stormcast forging process removes certain personality flaws, and undoubtedly one of those to be removed would be Settra's complete unwillingness to take any orders from anyone. He was so full of himself that he told the Chaos Gods themselves to go to hell, after being offered everything. One of his voice lines in Total Warhammer is him telling elves in diplomacy that their arrogance cannot possibly match his, because he is Settra. Not because he's thousands of years older than even most of them, not because he's the king of all the Tomb Kings, but because he is Settra. There is no chance he could have removed Settra's arrogance and unwillingness to serve. I don't care how strong or crafty Sigmar is. 2. While they did update the Tomb Kings, I cannot for the life of me believe they won't bring back some kind of Egyptian faction. Maybe that's a fool's hope, but I really think they'll do something like that down the line, and Settra would be perfect to lead that charge. 3. And most importantly, if I understand correctly, Settra was Settra. But GW told the author that created him they couldn't bring him back in that manner. Settra sacrificed himself to tell Manfred von Karstein to go lick bricks, and Stormcast said he was gone forever. Aside from that being the perfect situation to go, he's not actually gone because he's so badass. It also brings the perfect way to bring him back as he was. He got blown up to bits, and his soul wandered the mortal realms for a while. Then he found some spicy lost knowledge about the old world. Bang, bang, boom, he's Settra again. But for now, the story of the Imperishable comes to a close. Of course, I don't think he's done yet. He's just taking a well-deserved break before he informs the lesser people of the mortal realms, aka all of them except the Celestials and Prime, who is, of course, Karl Franz, of their place in life. And that place is to be cared for by the second greatest monarch to ever exist. The other option, of course, is to be used as more catapult ammunition. And that's it. You survived yet another video of mine. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. Or just rant about some filthy Xenos. That works too. Thank you to my wonderful channel members. You are the magic to my Tomb Kings miniatures, keeping me together so I can continue on indefinitely. Seriously though, look at these things. Magic is the only explanation for them staying together. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Seriously though, the Tomb King's characters are all more successful than the Emperor is. Oh, I'm dead. Cool, guess I'll just pick myself up and keep at it. Why would I sit on my throne all day? I've got work to do. For anyone about to mention how the Emperor has to contend with keeping a massive chaos rift shut, as well as lighting the Astronomicon, consider that someone like Settra simply would not allow those to be problems. How would Settra fix those issues? Well, he would intervene, obviously.